Maya Chun had always been the smallest person in any room she entered. At 24, she stood barely 5 feet tall with a slight frame that made her look even younger than her years. Her colleagues at Davidson and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms, often mistook her for an intern or a paralegal despite the expensive suits she wore and the Harvard law degree hanging on her office wall. The law firm occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper, its marble lobbies and mahogany-paneled conference rooms designed to intimidate opposing counsel and impress wealthy clients. Maya had worked there for 18 months, grinding through 70-hour weeks while watching her male colleagues advance past her with seemingly effortless ease. She specialized in corporate litigation, a field dominated by aggressive personalities and cutthroat competition. Her supervisor, Richard Blackwood, was everything Maya was not. Tall, broad-shouldered, and commanding, he had the kind of presence that made waiters hurry and opposing lawyers nervous. Richard had made partner at 32 and never let anyone forget it. He treated Maya like a particularly dim secretary, often asking her to fetch coffee or make copies while assigning the important casework to junior associates who had started months after her. "Chun," Richard would bark across the office, "I need you to organize these files, and maybe grab me a latte while you're at it." The other lawyers would chuckle, and Maya would bite her tongue, knowing that speaking up would only make things worse. She had bills to pay and student loans that felt like a mountain of debt crushing her shoulders. The breaking point came on a gray Tuesday morning in November. Maya arrived at the office early, as always, to prepare for the day ahead. She had been working on a complex merger case for weeks, researching precedents, and building what she knew was a solid legal strategy. The case involved TechFlow Industries, a mid-sized software company being acquired by a larger corporation, and there were several regulatory hurdles that needed careful navigation. Maya had discovered a little-known clause in federal trade law that could expedite the approval process, potentially saving the client months of delays and millions in legal fees. She had stayed up until 3 in the morning perfecting her presentation, crafting arguments that were both legally sound and practically brilliant. This was her chance to prove herself, to show that she belonged in the same league as her colleagues. The conference room filled up at 9 sharp. Richard sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by senior partners Harold Davidson and Margaret Associates. 3 junior associates took seats along the sides, all men who had been hired after Maya, but seemed to command more respect. Maya sat near the corner, her carefully prepared notes spread before her, heart pounding with nervous energy. "Gentlemen," Richard began, completely ignoring Maya's presence, "we need to discuss the TechFlow acquisition. The client is breathing down our necks about timeline, and, frankly, I'm not seeing any creative solutions from this team." He gestured broadly around the table, his eyes skipping over Maya as if she were invisible furniture. James Morrison, a junior associate who had joined the firm 6 months after Maya, immediately jumped in. "I think we need to focus on the antitrust angles," he said confidently. "If we can show that the merger doesn't substantially reduce competition, we should be able to push through the standard approval process." "Interesting point," Richard nodded approvingly. "What else?" David Park, another recent hire, leaned forward eagerly. "We could also explore the efficiency defense. If we demonstrate that the merger will result in significant cost savings and innovation benefits, that might sway the regulators." The discussion continued for 20 minutes, with each male colleague offering suggestions that Maya recognized as either obvious or flawed. She sat quietly, waiting for the right moment to present her research about the federal trade law clause that could solve their timing problems. Several times she started to speak, only to be interrupted or talked over. Finally, Harold Davidson, the senior partner, sighed heavily. "Gentlemen, I appreciate the effort, but I'm not hearing anything here that will satisfy our client. TechFlow is paying us premium rates, and they expect premium results. If we can't deliver, they'll take their business elsewhere." Maya saw her opening. She cleared her throat and began, "Actually, I've found something that might." "Chun," Richard interrupted sharply, "why don't you go check on the catering for lunch? I think we're going to be here for a while." The room erupted in knowing chuckles, and Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks. "But I have research on a federal clause that could," she persisted. "Research?" James Morrison smirked. What kind of research could you possibly have that we haven't already considered? More laughter filled the room, and Maya realized with crystal clarity that nothing she said would be taken seriously. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Never mind, she said quietly, gathering her notes. I'll go handle the catering. As she walked to the door, she heard David Park's stage whisper. Maybe we should have her organize our files too. Seems more her speed. The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. Maya spent the rest of the day in her small office, staring at her computer screen but unable to focus on work. The federal trade law clause sat in her research files, a brilliant solution that would never see the light of day because she was seen as nothing more than an overeducated assistant. She thought about her parents, immigrants who had worked double shifts in a factory to pay for her education. They had sacrificed everything so their daughter could have opportunities they never had. And here she was, reduced to fetching coffee and arranging lunch orders. That evening, Maya stayed late again, not because she had urgent work, but because she dreaded going home to her empty apartment where she would have nothing to distract her from the humiliation of the day. The office was quiet, most of her colleagues having left hours earlier to attend networking events or expensive dinners that Maya was never invited to join. She was packing up her things when she overheard Richard talking loudly on his phone in his corner office. His door was slightly ajar, and his voice carried clearly across the empty floor. I don't know what to tell you, Bill, Richard was saying to someone, presumably the TechFlow CEO. My team is stumped. We're looking at a standard 18-month approval process, maybe longer if there are complications. I know it's not what you wanted to hear, but that's the reality of the situation. Maya paused, her hand on her briefcase handle. Through the gap in Richard's door, she could see him pacing behind his desk, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious stress. No, I understand the timeline pressure, Richard continued. The IPO window won't stay open forever. But without some kind of regulatory breakthrough, we're stuck with the standard procedures. Trust me, if there was a faster way, we would have found it. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Richard making increasingly desperate promises about exploring every possible avenue. When he finally hung up, Maya heard him slam his hand on his desk and mutter something that sounded like profanity. Maya stood in the hallway for a long moment, holding the research that could solve Richard's problem, save the client millions, and potentially make the firm a fortune in additional business. She had the solution he needed, but she also knew exactly what would happen if she tried to present it. Richard would dismiss her, take credit for any useful ideas, and continue treating her like an expensive intern. As she rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She was done being invisible. She was done being the weak link. Tomorrow, she would find a way to make them listen, whether they wanted to or not. The city lights blurred past her car windows as she drove home, her mind already working on a plan. Maya Chun had been underestimated her entire career, but she was about to remind everyone exactly why Harvard Law School had offered her a full scholarship. Sometimes the smallest person in the room had the biggest ideas, and tomorrow, she would prove it in a way that no one could ignore or dismiss. The federal trade law clause in her research files represented more than just a legal strategy. It was her ticket to respect, recognition, and the career she had worked so hard to build. All she needed was 30 seconds to change everything, and Maya was determined to find those 30 seconds, no matter what it took. Maya arrived at the office the next morning with a plan that had kept her awake most of the night. She had spent hours researching not just the federal trade law clause, but also the backgrounds and interests of every person who would be in the emergency client meeting that Richard had scheduled for 10 o'clock. TechFlow's CEO, Bill Harrison, would be attending via video conference, along with his entire legal team and several board members. This was Maya's chance, but she needed to be smart about it. The law she had discovered was buried in Section 7A of the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act, specifically subsection 4C, which allowed for expedited merger reviews under certain narrow circumstances involving technological innovation and national economic interest. Most lawyers overlooked it because the language was complex and the precedent was limited, but Maya had found 3 successful cases from the past 5 years where similar mergers had been approved in under 90 days using this provision. Richard was in full crisis mode when Maya passed his office. She could see him frantically shuffling papers while barking orders at his assistant. The TechFlow case had become a firm-wide emergency overnight after Bill Harrison had threatened to fire Davidson and Associates and hire their biggest competitor. The merger was worth over $2 billion, and the legal fees alone represented nearly 10% of the firm's annual revenue. Maya knocked softly on Richard's door frame. "Excuse me, Richard? I wanted to offer my assistance with the TechFlow situation." Richard looked up from his papers, his face flushed with stress. "Chun, I appreciate the offer, but this is way above your level. Why don't you focus on organizing the research files? We're going to need everything perfectly cataloged for the new team we're bringing in." "Actually, I've been working on this case for weeks," Maya said calmly. "I have some research that might be relevant." "Research?" Richard's laugh was harsh. "Maya, this isn't law school. We need real solutions, not academic theories." The client is furious, and we have exactly 2 hours to come up with a miracle or we're all updating our resumes. Maya felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but this time she was prepared. "I understand the pressure you're under. But what if I told you I found a way to get the merger approved in under 90 days instead of 18 months? Richard paused, his hand frozen over a stack of contracts. "What are you talking about?" "Hart-Scott-Rodino Act, Section 7A, Subsection 4C, Maya said quietly. "There's a provision for expedited review of mergers involving technological innovation that serves national economic interests. TechFlow's artificial intelligence platform for supply chain optimization qualifies under the 2019 amendment definitions." For a moment, Richard just stared at her. Then, his expression shifted from confusion to skepticism. "Even if such a provision exists, which I doubt, the requirements would be impossibly specific. You can't just—" "I've already identified 3 successful precedents," Maya interrupted. DataStream Corporation in 2021, reduced from 16 months to 87 days. Innova Corp last year, approved in 92 days. And Tech Solutions Incorporated 6 months ago, which got approval in just 79 days. Richard's face went pale. He grabbed a legal database login from his desk and started typing frantically. Maya watched as his eyes widened while he read the statute she had cited. She had spent the entire night verifying every detail, checking every precedent, and building an ironclad argument. This could actually work," Richard whispered, more to himself than to Maya. She could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he calculated the implications. If they could deliver a 90-day approval instead of 18 months, TechFlow would not only keep them as counsel, but likely recommend them to other major clients. Richard would look like a genius, and his path to senior partner would be guaranteed. "The client meeting is in 90 minutes, Maya said. "I could walk you through the full strategy if you'd like." Richard was already reaching for his phone. "Yes, absolutely. Conference room 3, right now." "And Maya?" He paused, looking at her with something that might have been respect. "This better be as solid as you say it is." Maya gathered her research files and followed Richard to the conference room, her heart pounding with nervous energy. This was the moment she had been working toward for 18 months, the chance to prove that she belonged at the highest levels of corporate law. But, as they settled into the leather chairs around the polished table, Maya could see that Richard's initial surprise was already morphing back into his usual controlling demeanor. "Let me see everything," Richard said, extending his hand for Maya's files. "I need to understand this strategy inside and out before we present it to the client." Maya hesitated for just a moment before handing over her carefully organized research. She watched Richard's eyes scan her work, seeing his expression change as he realized the depth and sophistication of her analysis. She had not only identified the legal pathway but had also prepared detailed arguments for why TechFlow's technology met every requirement of the expedited review process. "This is actually quite good," Richard admitted grudgingly. "The precedent analysis is solid, and you've anticipated most of the potential objections. How long did this take you to put together?" "About 3 weeks of research and analysis," Maya replied. "I've been working on it during evenings and weekends." Richard nodded slowly, but Maya could see something calculating in his expression. "Maya, this is excellent work, truly. But presenting this kind of complex legal strategy to a major client requires a certain level of presence, experience with high-stakes negotiations. You understand. Maya's stomach dropped as she realized what was happening. You're going to present my research as your own. I'm going to present our firm's research in the most effective way possible, Richard corrected smoothly. That's my job as the senior attorney on this case. You'll be credited appropriately in our internal files, of course. But I should be the one presenting it, Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. I know this material better than anyone. I can answer questions, handle objections. Maya, Richard interrupted, his tone patronizing. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but client relations are about more than just knowing the law. It's about commanding respect, projecting authority. Clients need to feel confident that their legal team can handle the pressure of major negotiations. The implication was clear. Maya was too small, too young, too female to command that kind of respect. Richard was already reorganizing her research, preparing to take full credit for her breakthrough. Maya watched 18 months of invisibility about to be extended indefinitely. Besides, Richard continued, this is a partnership track opportunity. Successfully landing a strategy like this could make someone's career. I'm sure you understand that the firm needs to prioritize attorneys who are being considered for advancement. Maya felt something cold settle in her chest. She had found the solution that would save the case, the client, and possibly Richard's career, and he was already planning to erase her contribution completely. In 2 hours, he would walk into that meeting, present her work as his own brilliant insight, and emerge as the hero who saved a $2 billion deal. I need to prepare for the presentation, Richard said, already dismissing her. Why don't you work on organizing the supporting documents? Make sure everything is properly formatted for the client files. Maya stood slowly, leaving her research in Richard's hands. As she walked back to her office, she could hear him on the phone with Harold Davidson, excitedly explaining the breakthrough strategy he had discovered. Her name was not mentioned once. Sitting at her desk, Maya stared at her computer screen without seeing it. She thought about her parents again, about the sacrifices they had made, about the dreams they had pinned on their daughter's success. She thought about every slight, every dismissal, every moment when her ideas had been ignored or stolen. And then, she thought about the client meeting happening in 75 minutes, where Richard would present her work to TechFlow's leadership team. But Maya had one advantage that Richard did not know about. In her research, she had discovered not just the Hart-Scott-Rodino provision, but also a critical implementation detail that she had not included in the files she gave to Richard. A detail that would be absolutely essential when TechFlow's lawyers inevitably asked about the specific documentation requirements and filing procedures. Richard would stumble when asked for specifics beyond what was in her research files. He would look incompetent in front of the client, and Maya would be ready with the complete solution if anyone bothered to ask her. As Maya opened her computer and began preparing her backup presentation, she allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes being underestimated was actually an advantage. Richard was about to learn that stealing someone else's work only worked if you truly understood it, and understanding required the kind of detailed knowledge that could not be borrowed or faked. The clock on her computer showed 58 minutes until the meeting. Maya had 58 minutes to prepare for the moment when she would finally step out of the shadows and claim the recognition she had earned. Richard wanted to play power games. Maya was about to show him that the smallest person in the room could still control the entire board. The conference room buzzed with tension as Davidson and Associates, most senior partners, filed in for what everyone knew was a make-or-break meeting. Harold Davidson sat at the head of the table, his usually calm demeanor replaced by visible stress. Margaret Associates checked her watch nervously while shuffling through papers. The firm's reputation and a significant portion of their annual revenue hung in the balance. Maya slipped into the room quietly, taking a seat near the back corner where she could observe without drawing attention. She carried only a single folder containing her complete research, including the critical implementation details that Richard did not have. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Richard arrange his presentation materials at the front of the room. Richard looked confident, even cocky, as he adjusted his tie and tested the video conferencing equipment. He had spent the last hour memorizing Maya's research, and from his demeanor, it was clear he believed he could pull off the deception. The irony was not lost on Maya that Richard's arrogance, the very trait that had led him to steal her work, might also be his downfall. At exactly 10 o'clock, the large screen at the front of the room flickered to life, revealing TechFlow's executive team. Bill Harrison, the CEO, dominated the frame with his silver hair and intense eyes. Flanking him were the company's chief legal officer, Sarah Martinez, and chief technology officer, Dr. James Wu. Maya recognized two additional faces as board members from her research into the company's leadership. "Gentlemen," Bill Harrison's voice crackled through the speakers, his tone clipped and businesslike. "I'll be direct. We're not happy with the timeline you've presented. 18 months for merger approval is unacceptable. We have investors breathing down our necks, and our IPO window is closing rapidly. If you can't deliver a faster solution, we'll be forced to consider other counsel." Harold Davidson cleared his throat nervously. "Bill, I understand your frustration. That's exactly why we've called this emergency meeting. Richard Blackwood, our senior associate on your case, believes he's found a breakthrough that could dramatically accelerate the approval process." Maya watched as Richard stood up, his chest puffed with borrowed confidence. He walked to the front of the room and began his presentation with the kind of commanding presence that had always intimidated her. "Thank you, Harold. Bill, what I'm about to share with you represents months of intensive research into federal trade law and merger regulations." Richard clicked to his first slide, which displayed Maya's analysis of the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act. "I've discovered a little-known provision in Section 7A, subsection 4C, that allows for expedited merger reviews under specific circumstances." Maya bit her tongue as Richard explained her research as if it were his own brilliant insight. He walked through the precedent cases she had found, discussed the technological innovation requirements, and outlined the national economic interest arguments. To his credit, Richard had studied her work carefully, and his presentation was polished and persuasive. Bill Harrison leaned forward, his expression shifting from skepticism to interest. "How expedited are we talking about, Richard?" "Based on successful precedents, we're looking at approval in 60 to 90 days instead of 18 months, Richard replied smoothly. Maya had to admit he was selling her strategy effectively. Sarah Martinez, TechFlow's chief legal officer, spoke up from the screen. "That sounds almost too good to be true. What are the specific requirements for qualifying under this provision?" Richard launched into Maya's analysis of the qualification criteria, explaining how TechFlow's artificial intelligence platform met the technological innovation standards and how the supply chain optimization benefits served national economic interests. Maya could see the TechFlow executives becoming more engaged, nodding as Richard outlined the potential path forward. "This is exactly what we needed to hear," Dr. Wu interjected. "The AI platform represents a genuine breakthrough in supply chain efficiency. If we can get regulatory approval in 90 days, it changes our entire strategic timeline." Maya watched Richard bask in the praise, his confidence growing with each positive response. But she also noticed something else. Sarah Martinez was taking detailed notes, and her questions were becoming increasingly specific. "Richard," Sarah said, "I'm impressed with this strategy, but I need to understand the implementation mechanics. What's the exact filing procedure for invoking Section 7A, subsection 4C? Are there specific documentation requirements beyond the standard Hart-Scott-Rodino submissions?" Maya saw Richard's momentary hesitation, the slight pause that revealed his incomplete understanding of her research. This was the detail she had held back, the critical information that Richard would need to answer technical questions from experienced legal counsel. "Well," Richard began, "the filing procedure follows standard protocols with some additional documentation requirements." He was improvising now, Maya realized, trying to sound authoritative while essentially guessing at the specifics. Sarah Martinez frowned slightly. "Could you be more specific? Our legal team will need exact procedures to prepare the submission properly. What additional documentation is required? And are there different deadlines for the various components?" Richard's pause lasted longer this time. Maya could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead as he realized he was out of his depth. He glanced at his notes, but Maya's research files contained only the high-level strategy, not the detailed implementation procedures he needed to answer Sarah's questions. "The documentation requirements are comprehensive," Richard said vaguely. "I need to review the specific procedural details to give you exact requirements." Bill Harrison's expression was shifting back toward skepticism. Richard, you've presented this as a breakthrough strategy, but if you can't tell us how to actually implement it, what good is the theory? Maya felt the moment crystallizing around her. Richard was foundering, about to be exposed as someone who had surface knowledge but lacked the deep understanding necessary to guide a major client through complex legal procedures. The strategy she had developed was sound, but without the implementation details, it was useless. Harold Davidson was beginning to look panicked as he realized his senior associate was failing in real time during the most important client call of the year. Margaret Associates was staring at Richard with undisguised alarm. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for Richard to provide the specific information that Sarah Martinez had requested. Maya made her decision. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. Every head turned toward her corner of the room. Richard's face went pale as he realized Maya was about to speak. Harold Davidson looked confused about why a junior associate was interrupting a senior client presentation. "I'm sorry," Maya continued, standing up slowly, "but I believe I can answer Ms. Martinez's questions about the implementation procedures." Bill Harrison leaned toward his camera. "And you are?" "Maya Chun, corporate litigation associate," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "I've been working extensively on the procedural requirements for expedited merger reviews under Section 7A. Richard started to speak, clearly intending to cut her off, but Sarah Martinez interrupted him. "Ms. Chun, please, we need these details. What exactly is required for the filing?" Maya opened her folder and began to speak with the quiet confidence that comes from absolute mastery of the subject matter. The expedited review requires 3 distinct filing components with staggered deadlines. First, a preliminary technological assessment must be submitted within 15 days of announcing merger intent. This document requires certification from an independent technology evaluation board, which takes approximately 3 weeks to arrange. She could see Sarah Martinez writing quickly, finally, getting the specific information she needed. Second, Maya continued, "You'll need economic impact documentation demonstrating national interest benefits. This requires data from at least 5 independent economic analysis firms and must be submitted no later than 30 days after the preliminary assessment. The analysis should focus specifically on supply chain efficiency metrics and job creation potential." Bill Harrison was nodding now, and Maya could see recognition in his eyes that she knew exactly what she was talking about. Finally, the comprehensive merger documentation must be submitted with specific addenda addressing technological innovation protocols and national security considerations. There's a particular formatting requirement for the technology transfer sections that's often overlooked, but absolutely critical for approval. Sarah Martinez looked up from her notes. "Ms. Chun, this level of procedural detail is exactly what we need. How long would it take to prepare these submissions properly?" "With proper preparation and coordination, we could have all documentation submitted within 6 weeks of today," Maya replied. "Based on the precedent timelines I've analyzed, that would put us on track for approval in approximately 75 to 85 days. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Sarah Martinez typing notes. Maya could feel Richard's eyes burning into her, but she kept her focus on the screen where TechFlow's executives were looking at her with the kind of respect and attention she had never received in this conference room. Dr. Wu leaned forward. "Ms. Chun, you mentioned precedent analysis. How many similar cases have you studied for this strategy?" "I've conducted detailed analysis of 11 expedited merger reviews over the past 5 years, including 3 that are directly comparable to TechFlow's situation. I can provide comprehensive precedent documentation with timelines, approval factors, and implementation strategies that succeeded versus those that failed." Bill Harrison smiled for the first time during the call. Now this is what I wanted to hear. Detailed, actionable strategy from someone who clearly understands both the theory and the practice. Maya felt a surge of vindication as she realized that TechFlow's executives were looking to her, not Richard, for the expertise they needed. But she also knew that the real test was just beginning. She had stepped out of the shadows and claimed her moment, but now she had to deliver on every promise she had just made. The silence in the conference room following Maya's presentation was deafening. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room focused on her. But for the first time in her career, It was not the uncomfortable attention of being dismissed or overlooked. This was the focused attention of professionals recognizing genuine expertise. Bill Harrison broke the silence first. Ms. Chun, I have to say, this is the most comprehensive and actionable legal strategy we've heard in months of working with various counsel. Sarah, what's your assessment? Sarah Martinez nodded enthusiastically from the screen. Agreed completely. Ms. Chun clearly has both the theoretical knowledge and practical understanding we need to execute this expedited approval strategy. The level of procedural detail she's provided demonstrates exactly the kind of preparation that successful merger applications require. Maya felt a surge of professional pride, but she also noticed Richard's face growing increasingly red. She could practically see him calculating how to regain control of the situation, how to take credit for her expertise while minimizing her role. But TechFlow's executives were not finished with their questions. Dr. Wu leaned forward on screen. Ms. Chun, given your analysis of the precedent cases, what would you estimate as our probability of success using this expedited pathway? Maya had anticipated this question and had her analysis ready. Based on the 11 cases I've studied, mergers that properly address all 3 filing components have an 87% approval rate for expedited review. TechFlow's technology platform is stronger than average in meeting the innovation criteria, and your economic impact potential is substantial. I would estimate a 90 to 95% probability of approval within the expedited timeframe. Bill Harrison smiled broadly. Outstanding. Harold, I think we need to restructure our legal team arrangement. Ms. Chun should be leading the expedited filing strategy, given her obvious expertise in this area. Maya watched Harold Davidson's face cycle through confusion, surprise, and then calculating assessment as he realized the implications. His most important client was essentially demanding that a junior associate lead a multi-million-dollar legal strategy. But the client's satisfaction was paramount, and TechFlow had just expressed complete confidence in Maya's abilities. Certainly, Bill, Harold replied smoothly. Maya has been doing excellent work on this case. We'll restructure the team to leverage her expertise most effectively. Richard finally found his voice. Harold, I think we should discuss team structure internally before making any commitments to the client. Ms. Chun has certainly contributed valuable research, but leading a major merger strategy requires exactly the kind of deep knowledge and practical understanding that Ms. Chun has just demonstrated. Sarah Martinez interrupted from the screen. Richard, with respect, your presentation showed you understood the theory, but Ms. Chun clearly knows the implementation details that will actually determine our success or failure. Maya felt a moment of sympathy for Richard, watching his carefully constructed authority crumble in real time. But the sympathy was brief, overwhelmed by the satisfaction of finally being recognized for her actual capabilities rather than dismissed because of her appearance or age. Bill Harrison was all business now. Here's what I propose. Ms. Chun leads the expedited filing strategy with whatever support team she needs. I want weekly progress reports directly from her, and I want her available for all strategy calls with our executive team. Harold, can you make that happen? Absolutely, Harold replied, though Maya could see him already calculating the firm politics implications of elevating a junior associate over a senior one so dramatically. Excellent, Bill continued. Ms. Chun, when can you start on the preliminary technology assessment documentation? Maya felt a moment of vertigo as she realized that in the span of 30 seconds, she had gone from invisible junior associate to lead counsel on a billion-dollar merger. But her voice was steady when she replied, I can begin immediately. Based on the timeline requirements, I'd recommend we schedule the Independent Technology Evaluation Board review for next Friday. I've already identified 3 approved evaluation firms that specialize in AI platform assessment, and I can have the preliminary documentation prepared for submission by Wednesday. Dr. Wu nodded approvingly. You've clearly thought this through comprehensively. What do you need from our team? I'll need access to your core AI platform documentation, your supply chain efficiency data from the past 18 months, and your projections for economic impact across different market sectors. I'll also need to coordinate with your internal legal team to ensure our submissions align with your corporate compliance requirements. Maya was amazed at how natural it felt to take charge of the strategy, to speak with authority about timelines, and requirements. This was what she had been trained to do at Harvard, what she had dreamed of doing during those long nights studying for the bar exam. Finally, she was being allowed to use her actual skills instead of organizing files and fetching coffee. Sarah Martinez was typing rapidly again. Perfect. I'll have our legal team prepare the documentation package you need. Miss Chun, should we schedule a direct coordination call between our teams? That would be ideal, Maya replied. I'd suggest Tuesday morning to review the documentation and confirm our filing strategy. As the call wrapped up with discussions of timelines and coordination details, Maya noticed that Richard had remained completely silent. His earlier confidence had evaporated, and he was staring at the table with the expression of someone watching his career plans disintegrate. When Bill Harrison finally signed off with enthusiastic thanks and promises to recommend Davidson and Associates to other companies needing similar expertise, the conference room fell silent again. Harold Davidson and Margaret Associates were staring at Maya with expressions that mixed respect, surprise, and calculation. Harold spoke first. Maya, that was impressive. Clearly we've been underutilizing your capabilities. Thank you, Maya replied simply. She was not about to diminish her achievement with false modesty or apologetic qualifiers. Margaret Associates leaned forward. The client was clearly impressed with your expertise. This could be a significant development for your career trajectory here. Maya nodded, understanding the subtext. TechFlow was now specifically requesting her involvement, which gave her leverage within the firm that she had never possessed before. Client demands trumped internal politics, and TechFlow had just made it clear that they considered her essential to their success. Richard finally looked up from the table. Maya, I want you to know that I've always recognized your research capabilities. I was simply trying to present our team's work in the most effective format for the client. Maya met his eyes steadily. She could have graciously accepted his attempt to save face, could have minimized the significance of what had just happened. Instead, she chose honesty. Richard, we both know that's not what happened here. You took my research and presented it as your own work, without understanding it deeply enough to answer basic implementation questions. The client deserved better, and frankly, so did I. The room was tense as Maya's words hung in the air. She had just directly challenged a senior associate in front of partners, something that would have been career suicide just an hour earlier. But the dynamics had shifted fundamentally. She was no longer the dispensable junior associate who could be bullied or dismissed. Harold Davidson cleared his throat. I think we should focus on moving forward productively. Maya, you'll obviously need additional support for a project of this scope. I'm authorizing you to assemble whatever team you need, with appropriate budget for outside consultants if necessary. I appreciate that, Harold. I'll prepare a comprehensive project plan and resource request by tomorrow morning. As the meeting broke up, Maya gathered her materials with steady hands despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. She had done it. In 30 seconds of speaking truth to power, she had transformed her entire career trajectory. No longer would she be relegated to organizing files while her ideas were stolen by others. She was now the lead attorney on one of the firm's most important cases, with direct client relationships and the respect of senior partners. Richard approached her as she was leaving the conference room. Maya, I hope there are no hard feelings about this situation. I was just trying to present our work effectively. Maya looked at him for a long moment before responding. Richard, there are no hard feelings because this was never about feelings. It was about competence, preparation, and respect for the work itself. You try to take credit for something you didn't understand, and the client recognized the difference between surface presentation and deep expertise. I suppose you're right, Richard admitted reluctantly. For what it's worth, your research really was exceptional. Thank you, Maya replied. And Richard, next time you want to present someone else's work, you might want to actually understand it first. As Maya walked back to her office, she passed the same colleagues who had laughed when Richard dismissed her ideas just 24 hours earlier. Now they watched her with careful respect, understanding that the dynamics of the firm had shifted in a way that no one had anticipated. Maya sat at her desk and opened her computer, ready to begin the most important legal work of her career. The preliminary technology assessment documentation would not write itself, and TechFlow was counting on her expertise to navigate the complex regulatory environment successfully. But first, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate what had just happened. For 18 months, she had been the smallest person in every room, dismissed and underestimated by colleagues who confused presence with competence. Today, she had proven that sometimes the quiet voice in the corner has the loudest impact. Maya Chun was no longer the weak link. She was the essential link, the person who held the key to her client's success and her firm's reputation. And it had taken exactly 30 seconds to change everything.